Whatever happened to the better nerf Aurelia meme, by the way? Years ago, if we only had known about the type of champions we'd be seeing today. What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another ProGuides high elo tier list. My name is Dan, and I'll be your host for this video. Like always, we're updating our tier list for the latest patch, patch 10.15, so that you guys know who the strongest picks are in high elo. These tier lists are targeted specifically at Platinum and higher. If you haven't already, though, I suggest you guys check out Patch Rundown that was posted earlier this week. We cover all the changes there and also provide tier lists that take a more holistic approach to the player base. Before we get started, though, do me a quick favor and answer our question of the day. This one is a pretty deep one, but I want to know what your personal thoughts on balance are. Should champions be balanced for competitive play or for the average player? Maybe it's somewhere in the middle, but I want to know where you guys stand and why you feel that way. While I personally used to believe that balancing for competitive play was the way to go, I do think that putting a good amount of emphasis on the average player is extremely important. A lot of people play this game for fun, and I think it's important to consider how the game is for most of us. Let me know your answers in the comments below. First up for balance changes is a nerf to tank Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks isn't a very popular solo lane pick by any means. However, it's still important that Riot makes sure that they even balance the champions that aren't getting the spotlight. Fiddlesticks' presence in high elo isn't the most impactful, but he's easily classified as one of the more popular low-key picks. The healing from minions on Fiddlesticks W has gone down from 25% to 15% this patch, and while we haven't placed him previously, we've decided to put him in the B tier for now. Ornn was also nerfed this patch. His armor was reduced from 36 to 33. Especially in competitive play, Ornn has been the go-to pick when a clear answer wasn't present. Kinda like how the best answer is to always agree with your significant other even when you know they're wrong, pro teams could always opt into picking Ornn to play it safe. Even following this minor nerf, I'm sure that Ornn will be a relatively safe pick when you need a scaling, reliable frontliner. Nerf after nerf have left Ornn in a weaker spot than before, and he'll remain in the B tier in spite of these changes. Kicking off buffs is Shen. Shen's passive shield value went up from 50 to 101 to 70 to 121. That's 20 more shield at all stages of the game, and he's definitely feeling much stronger as a result. Remember that Shen lowers the cooldown on his passive shield whenever he hits enemy champions with his abilities. This cooldown reduction scales with level, so it's actually a much bigger buff than it looks in the late game. Because Shen's ultimate doesn't help him at all in 1v1s, high elo players haven't really liked picking him that much. They want to carry their games rather than coin flip them over whether their other lanes can find success. Players that do play him do so in order to lower the chances that their teammates feed. Regardless, Shen getting some more power on his passive gives him a little bit more room to work with in the top lane. A stronger early, mid, and late game should make him a more formidable lane opponent and also assist him when he's trying to fend off split pushers. Shen remains in the S tier moving forward. Finally, Aurelia was buffed, and I know a lot of high elo players are super excited about this one. The attack speed bonus per stack on her passive has gone up from 8 to 12% to 8 to 16%. Aurelia has been underperforming at all levels of play, including high elo. However, the effects of this buff have already stirred a wind of change for her. Aurelia's win rate, play rate, and ban rate have been slowly climbing. This buff increased the strength of Aurelia's late game pretty significantly, and that's where players were finding a lot of issues in previous patches. Aurelia will remain in the A tier for now, but our analysts will keep an eye on her because she might break into the S tier this patch. With that said, the OP pick in high elo for the top lane is definitely Darius. Even there, he holds record-breaking ban rates and is easily one of the most contested picks in the game. His pressure during the laning phase is quite terrifying, and he snowballs so hard. Patch after patch, Darius has rung in as the king of the top lane, and even now with no nerfs, he isn't going anywhere. I'm sure that Riot is weighing competitive play into Darius' balance right now. He isn't cutting it there, so he's avoiding nerfs for the general player base. If you're able to get your hands on him, Darius is arguably one of the best top laners at the moment. One pick that we've been subtly hyping up is Camille. She's risen to the top of popularity lists for high diamond, master, grandmaster, and challenger players. When taking into consideration all of these brackets, Camille actually surpasses Darius in play rate. But remember that Darius' ban rate ended at over 40% last patch. If he wasn't banned in almost every other game, it's likely that he'd still be the most played top laner. Here's a quick rundown of our S tier though. Fiora, Kled, Wukong, Shen, Jax, Singed, Garen, Maokai, Camille, and Hecarim. We also dropped Syndra from the list down to the A tier because of her low play rate. The nerfs she received previously hurt quite a bit, and this change has come a bit late. Less players are picking her in general, and her presence as a flex pick is a bit weaker than before as a result. That covers the top lane, so let's hop into the jungle next. First up in the jungle is, of course, Lilia. Like in our patch rundown video, I'm going to heavily encourage you guys to check out our videos covering her. We put in a ton of work to create a comprehensive guide, and even if you aren't that invested in learning to play her, you should give it a watch to learn how to play against her, which is arguably more important. We cover all of her abilities, tips, and strategies playing as her, and thus, you'll also learn about how to play with and against one in your games. At the moment, Lilia looks like a very promising pick. While we don't have much data to go off just yet, our analysts' first impressions of her are that she's extremely powerful, but as always, we'll leave her unrated for now. Skarner received massive changes this patch. His Q now deals 15% of his total AD and 1 to 3% of his target's maximum health, as opposed to dealing 33 to 45% of his total AD. When empowered, it deals 15% of his total AD and 1 to 3% of his target's maximum health, and also 30% of his AP as damage. His Q's empowered buff duration went up from 4 to 5 seconds, and the mana cost is now 15 flat rather than scaling up with level. Finally, his E no longer slows down after hitting a target. For all 2 Skarner players in high elo, these changes look astounding, and while we didn't include him previously for a low play rate in high elo, we'll add him to the B tier for now. There's a lot of speculation that he'll be a very powerful pick, especially because of the changes to the Predator keystone over the past 2 patches. Next up is Gragas, whose W's AP ratio went up from 50 to 60% and his ultimate's AP ratio from 70 to 80%. AP Gragas is a pretty terrifying champion to play against, especially when fed. This brings flashbacks to the old days of League, but it's not the same Gragas as back then, since his ult is much easier to avoid now. Nevertheless, players need to keep an eye out for Gragas' return to dominance. He hasn't been performing too well, but our analysts do believe that in high elo and competitive play, Gragas may make a return very soon. Because of his rather unimpressive performance in the past few patches, however, our analysts will keep Gragas in the B tier for now. These buffs might just bring him up to the level he needs to be to keep his spot there. One of the most anticipated nerfs all year is this one. Lee Sin has finally been hit. Lee Sin is a crowd favorite, and this doesn't change in high elo either. His W's cooldown has been increased from 12 to 14 seconds, which will hurt his mobility quite a bit. Ward hopping or dashing to allied minions is a bit more punishing than before, and even when self-casted or casted onto an allied champion, he still needs to wait a whole second longer before casting his W again. Although this isn't enough to drop Lee Sin out of the S tier, we do want to mention that this nerf is a big one. We've also reformatted our tier list significantly as a side note, but more on that in a bit. Our OP pick for the jungle is none other than Karthus. We love Karthus R. Oh man, tell me in the comments how much you love this ability, guys. Alright, that's enough sarcasm from me, but I honestly do believe that his ultimate is one of the strongest in the game. League of Legends is such an unforgiving game, and I'm sure so many of you guys agree with me. One kill can turn the tides of the game heavily, and a lot of the time, a single takedown can end the laning phase for a lot of us. Karthus isn't just an R button machine though. He deals insane amounts of damage, pressures objectives well, and has a ton of teamfight presence even after death. Karthus ended the last patch with a 52% win rate in Platinum and higher, and I'd say that's a great way to come back into the jungle following a set of changes. Our S tier for the jungle consists of Lee Sin, Kha'Zix, Rengar, Zac, Nidalee, Kayn, Evelynn, Graves, Rek'Sai, Elise, Wukong, Fiddlesticks, and Olaf. Kha'Zix has been on a rampage across all ranks, and his dominance doesn't taper off in high elo. What made him miss the spot Karthus took is the fact that he relies a little bit more heavily on snowballing early game leads. Kha'Zix feels rather weak from behind, and clawing back into games that start out rough can be rather challenging. Karthus, on the other hand, is always a ticking time bomb. He's arguably the hardest scaling jungle champion in the game, and even putting him behind early doesn't necessarily mean you've won the game from the get-go. Alright, we finished up what we needed to in the jungle, so let's work towards the mid lane now. We got a short list of mid lane changes, so let's run through it real quick. First is Twisted Fate. It didn't take Riot very long before deciding to take some strength away. Sorry, TF mains. However, it was a nice few patches we got with him, and he was definitely pretty strong. Twisted Fate's W cooldown has gone up from 6 flat to 8 to 6 based on ability level. This is a huge early game nerf, even though he'll still scale up to the exact same point he's at right now. By level 13, you won't feel these nerfs at all, but that doesn't change the fact that he's going to take a decent hit for the first 12 levels of the game. An increased cooldown on his W is huge, and it's definitely to hurt Twisted Fate players in all sorts of scenarios, whether they're going for constant skirmishes or attempting to push in wave after wave to roam. Twisted Fate won't be able to access blue cards nearly as often, and when he uses his W, he'll also open himself up to all-ins or extended trades when laning against more aggressive opponents. We dropped Twisted Fate down to the A tier. These nerfs hurt, and we're certain he'll feel weaker. Swain is next on our list. His movement speed has been reduced from 335 to 325, and his passive cooldown has changed from 12 to 6 to 10 seconds flat, but will now scale with cooldown reduction. His passive's mana restore is gone, and his Q cooldown was buffed from 10 to 4 seconds to 9 to 3 seconds. It also fires in a narrower cone, but the bolts will pass through enemy champions. Also, Swain's W's range has been increased from 3,500 to 5,500 to 7,500. Its damage decreased from 100 to 300 to 80 to 240, and its mana cost reduced from 70 to 130 to 70 to 110. Finally, Swain's E cooldown went down from 13 to 9 to 10 seconds flat, and the mana cost reduced from 60 to 80 to 50 flat. These are massive changes, and Riot specifically stated that they wanted to make Swain viable in high elo and competitive play. These changes look like they might do just the trick. I especially love what they've done with Swain's W. The range on it is absolutely insane right now, and it'll allow Swain to provide his team with invaluable information as a result. As this is a massive set of changes, we've placed Swain as an unrated pick because we'll definitely need to see what these changes are going to do to him. Tune in next week to our mid-patch update to see how he's doing overall. For mid laners, our OP pick right now is Galio. While we know some of you guys might disagree with Galio specifically, we're going to explain our reasoning for this one. First off, the statistics don't lie. Galio was a popular enough pick to merit the rest of his statistics as he had over 100,000 games played last patch. He ended the patch with a solid 52% win rate, but that's enough with numbers. Let's talk about reasoning. The mid lane is a decent mix of champions right now, ranging from AD assassins, AP assassins, control mages, and other random niche picks. Galio is a pretty solid blind pick into practically all of these matchups. Galio is naturally a champion designed to thrive against AP champions, so you can pick him into most AP assassins favorably, while also applying pressure onto control mages with some jungle pressure. While AD champions are a bit more challenging, Galio can safely clear waves with his W and is a bit tankier than most other mid laners, so he has an easier time surviving, unlike traditional mages who can't do much when assassins are constantly running them down the lane and solo killing them. The fact that Galio's crowd control reliably locks down melee champions also dissuades blind aggression from many AD assassins. Comparatively, assassins can typically still go 1-for-1 even if they get ganked while all-inning a traditional mage. Following up in our S tier for this patch are Zoe, Talon, Diana, Vladimir, Fizz, Katarina, Karthus, and Zed. We ended up dropping Cassiopeia into the A tier because the meta has shifted a bit against her. A lot of AD champions are becoming more popular, and her low base armor proves to be a huge hindrance against them. She's not nearly as safe to pick anymore, and as a result, our analysts bumped her down a tier. That's it for the mid lane. Let's talk about the bottom lane next. I know a lot of you guys have been eagerly awaiting an Aphelios nerf, and we've gotten another one. Irelia might have to step aside because maybe the new meme is better nerf Aphelios at this point. The startup on his turrets has gone up from 0.25 to 0.35 seconds, and their range was reduced from 575 to 500. 550 is the baseline for most marksmen, so now the turrets won't outrange most of them. In fact, it's the other way around now. On the other hand, I'm sure Heimerdinger players are happy that their turrets are comparatively more annoying now. Finally, his Infernum Hurricane bolts no longer damage enemies as they pass through. While we did move Aphelios down in our patch rundown earlier this week, we're keeping him in the S tier for high elo. Aphelios is an extremely powerful champion. There's so much packed into his kit, and we don't think high elo players are going to be ready to drop him just yet. The next change is to Caitlyn. Her base AD went from 62 to 65, and her movement speed from 325 to 330. Caitlyn players, this is your patch to shine. These are pretty massive buffs. While they might not seem like much, you have to consider that these are for Caitlyn. She's the designated bottom lane bully champion with her incredible range advantage over marksmen, and the extra movement speed isn't something worth laughing at. I know a lot of people love to meme 5 movement speed buffs and nerfs a lot, but I expect that most of the player base didn't make jokes about this one because Caitlyn is a marksman after all. Movement speed is arguably much more important on ranged champions than melee ones, and we're already seeing Caitlyn absolutely dominate high elo. Caitlyn is designated as one of our OP champions this patch, so make sure to pick or ban her whenever possible. Another OP pick for this patch is Ashe. Our analyst placed her in the A tier last patch, but did make an update in our mid-patch update talking about how strong she was proving to be. Her utility and powerful laning merit her as one of the strongest picks in both competitive play as well as solo queue. It doesn't take too much thought to use Ashe's E. Even if your team isn't that coordinated, you can still throw a hawkshot at a random jungle camp to tell your team where the enemy jungler is or isn't. The S tier for this patch consists of Senna, Heimerdinger, Draven, Vayne, Aphelios, and Kai'Sa. That's it for the bot lane, so let's finish things off by talking about supports. Thresh is the first support we want to talk about. His W's cooldown has gone up from 22 to 12 to 22 to 14. We mentioned that this won't have much of an impact in low elo, but high elo players will definitely feel this nerf. Yes, high elo players tend to click on the lantern more often, so this nerf is a big one. 2 more seconds on the lantern can be game breaking, but of course, it's always situational. The ability was so powerful that players were consistently maxing it second rather than maxing E second for more damage. We don't think many high elo players will opt into the E max because of how powerful the lantern is. Instead, a lot of them will likely continue maxing W second and just live with the nerfs. Because of the type of champion he is, we don't think many players will stop playing Thresh. His early game still remains just as powerful as before, and this nerf is pretty similar to the nerf to Lee Sin, who also had his W nerf. Thresh will remain an S tier pick, but he might arguably be sitting on the border of dropping into the high A tier. Yuumi, however, received a buff this patch. Her passive's mana restore has been increased from 50 to 150 to 25 to 100 plus 8% of her maximum mana. The cooldown on her passive has also gone down from 20 to 8 to 18 to 6. They actually hit Yuumi a little too hard with the nerf she received a few patches ago, and this buff should help compensate for it. This change is a good one because it does make Yuumi stronger, but forces Yuumi players to take risks if they want to take advantage of it. Using Yuumi's passive is always a pretty big risk, as when caught out, Yuumi almost always dies. Although the statistics are still fresh and aren't completely indicative, we've moved Yuumi up to the B tier because she's already showing signs of recovery following this buff. The final support change for this patch was to Rakan. His passive's cooldown has been adjusted to scale from 40 to 15.5 based on level. Previously, the cooldown would reduce by 3 every 2 levels, but it'll now drop by 1.5 every level. This smoothens his power curve and is a nice minor buff for Rakan players. Rakan is one of the most satisfying supports to see succeed, and I'm really excited that he got a buff, even if it was a small one. Because this buff was so small, however, we'll keep him untouched in the A tier. Let's face it, high elo players are pretty good at the champions they like to play. For our OP pick for supports, we've thrown the spotlight onto Bard. Patch after patch, Bard players are doing something right. It's difficult to assess whether Bard is actually OP or if players are just that good at him. Nevertheless, he's ended patch after patch in the green with win rates just below 53% time and time again. Bard is one of the most unique champions in the game, and there's so many different ways you can utilize his utility. You can definitely get creative when playing Bard, and he's capable of playing every niche as a support. He's your hard engage, your peel, your utility, and sometimes even your secondary carry. It's no surprise that high elo players are finding so much success with him. To reiterate, low elo players aren't finding the same amount of success with him, and in fact, his overall win rate is actually held back considerably by players in silver and bronze. Not trying to discourage any players from those brackets from playing him, I'm just talking about the data here. It's just that he's a bit harder to play and is definitely a champion that requires some practice. For our S tier, we have Senna, Lulu, Thresh, Leona, Blitzcrank, and Janna. Like in the mid lane, we've also placed Swain into the unrated tier as well, since he did receive those massive changes this patch. He was finding more success in low elo than high elo, but once again, we'll keep you guys updated on his standings next week. That concludes our patch 10.15 high elo tier list. Thanks again for watching, and make sure to check out ProGuides.com, as we have a bunch of resources aimed at helping you guys improve. We're always updating our content there, as well as here on our YouTube channel, so make sure you connect with us by subscribing. Until next time though, I wish you guys all the best of luck on Summoner's Rift.